He looked out his kitchen window. He waited patiently to see if it happened again. The strangest thing had been happening at 7 in the morning for a week. At 7, he placed his hot coffee on the counter. He was right again. Greg Banduxai was a typical Minnesota middle-aged dad. Greg, a local diner owner, woke up early to make breakfast. Greg loved his predictable life. He threatened to change his life until that week. Greg and Cheryl, who was pregnant with their first child, moved to Minnesota in their late 20s. Minnesota's seemingly endless natural features attracted him. Greg considered it the best place to raise a family. After settling in, he bought an old restaurant and renovated it into a popular diner that became his livelihood. His life was perfect. Greg raised his family in Minnesota. This time, he saw everything his town had to offer. He saw animals on the streets at night and early morning. Wildlife services intervened several times when dangerous animals strayed into town. He'd seen nothing like that week. The week that it happened had been as typical as any for Greg. As was his routine, he woke up at 5 and ran through the day's logistics before making breakfast for his family. After getting dressed, he sipped coffee by the kitchen window and watched the sunrise. It happened then. Screams greeted Greg. A shout of excitement, not fear. Laughs followed a giggle. If you like my videos, don't forget to like or subscribe. Thanks in advance. Greg's neighborhood had peaceful mornings. Why was this one different? Greg left without his coffee. He looked back. Greg saw school children. They followed Greg's neighbor's 10-year-old son, Miles. Greg intervened because the kids were bullying Miles. When he caught Miles, he was about to call the kids out. A small deer grazed before Miles. The boy followed the deer, curious. Greg smiled. Especially young kids like Miles watched and played with deer. Back home. If only he understood. Tomorrow was the same. Greg ran out after hearing the kids screaming, and Miles was behind the tiny deer. Greg knew something was up as the week went on. Greg knew he had to investigate Miles and the deer by Friday. He placed a camera on his garage door the day before to watch the 10-year-old. The camera footage showed him nothing new. Miles walked the deer every morning at 7 before returning it to the woods. What happened? Greg woke up earlier than usual on Friday. He planned the day and made breakfast by 6. He waited for Miles and his friend in the kitchen window with a hot coffee. Nothing happened for minutes. As 7 approached, kids flocked out of their houses to wait for Miles, a rock star. Miles didn't arrive after a minute. As the second minute ended, he emerged at the neighborhood's farthest point, the deer walking beside him from lawn to lawn. Greg understood then. He fled the house, racing to Miles. Greg wondered about Miles all week. He zoned out at work several times trying to solve this wonderful mystery. Everything made sense as he cut the damp grass. Despite solving the mystery, he was still far from the truth. Greg thought he was feeding the deer as he approached. He slowed to avoid scaring the animal. The closer he got, the more he understood. Greg had never seen a deer's eyes. As Miles walked with the deer, they were milky gray and blind. Everything clicked then. Miles took his time in the morning to help the blind deer find grass. Greg's jaw slackened at the revelation, and he took a step back, still unsure of what he'd learned. His son had a rare trait. Greg had to act now. His son tried to help the deer, but he didn't have the resources. Greg went further. He would take over and help the deer. A week later, an IDNR-licensed wildlife rehabilitation group took the deer. Greg and Miles' parents explained everything and praised him for his duty and responsibility. He assured them he was glad the deer would get help. Greg and Cheryl relaxed after saving the deer. They didn't know their son's potential. Few weeks later, he ran into the house with important news. He explained the situation. Concerned another deer. Their son felt compelled to help another deer. But it wouldn't be what they thought it was. He insisted they follow him. They walked to their house's road. Miles was clearly distraught, and they would soon see the reason why. But what happened when they investigated their son's cry for help was unimaginable. Greg saw what his son meant when he reached the road. The ground had a thorn. Greg panicked. He hoped no car hit the poor animal. Something was very wrong. The deer was lying strangely. It appeared to be lying defensively. Things only got stranger. Cheryl told Greg it was probably hiding from predators. She looks young. She was lost without her mother's guidance. Their son found another injured deer. The family knew they had to act to save the poor thing. The poor fawn was on the road all alone, and if it stayed there, a driver might not see it until it was too late. While planning a rescue, the family watched the fawn. The family had no idea what was behind them. The family heard rustling behind. They turned to see what was approaching, but what happened next was unexpected. They had no idea what was behind the sounds. Was something evil waiting for them to leave the fawn? Perhaps a predator waited. Knowing the deer was easy prey without humans. They had to save it. Greg helped the animal despite a low predator risk. He couldn't refuse his son's pleading eyes. To succeed, they had to act quickly. Greg approached slowly. It wouldn't hurt him, but he didn't want to scare it. He had to approach to act. Greg tried not to scare the roadside animal as he crept closer. As he approached, he ensured the animal was comfortable. He was touching. He just had to slowly pick up the animal and move it to safety. If not careful, the fawn could fight. Greg held the deer. When the animal struggled, he crossed the road. He couldn't drop it now. If it hits asphalt now, it could be seriously injured. Greg held on until he crossed the road. He would rescue the fawn. Greg heard the rustling again after bringing the fawn to the woods. The fawn was hunted again. Greg stopped it from killing. He moved faster and backed up between the animal and the fawn. He was ready for the predator to rip into his back. Next was the most unexpected thing ever. Greg turned to face his attacker but saw something surprising. Behind him was a doe. He had to give her the fawn or face her wrath. Slowly lowering the baby, it ran toward its mother. They were safe together. Greg was thrilled to see the fawn safely with its mother. They could relax. Miles was jumping for joy when the family saw everyone was safe. Greg rejoined his family across the road and watched the beautiful event. They stood together. The mother checked on her baby by smelling him. Greg hoped his scent wouldn't confuse the fawn. That happened before. Animal mothers can abandon their offspring if they smell a human. The family silently watched the beautiful moment they had just seen. However, they now feared a deterioration. Thankfully, the mother licked her child and they bounced into the trees. Greg was proud of his son for saving two animals that needed humans. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again in the next video.